Good evening everybody and welcome to the first episode of Under the Covers with Lyndon, which is a collection of ghost stories sent in by listeners mainly to the Murder at Bedtime. So anyway, this is the first one. This will only be maybe 2 or 3 times a year as I get the stories in, but I've managed to get a collection for the first lot. So I'm going to start off with a story of my own. In fact, it's my only ever brush with anything that I can't explain. So I'm going to start off with this one. I was living in Quarrendon a few years ago when at 1 in the morning and not being able to sleep, I decided to go downstairs and have a cup of coffee. I made it, then sat down at the kitchen table, deciding to read the Argos catalogue. I thought that would help me sleep. From my seat, I could see right down the hallway to the front door and to the left the staircase to the landing and bedrooms. As I sipped my coffee and read, I heard someone walking across the landing. I assumed it was one of the kids going to the bathroom, but I never heard the door close and I never heard the light be switched on. The footsteps paused and then started to descend the stairs. I looked to my left and no one was coming down. I must admit that I was beginning to sweat a bit, but then the footsteps stopped and I think I heaved a bit of a sigh of relief. But then I heard the quietest sound of scratching coming from somewhere. It started to get louder and now appeared to be coming from the front door. I now actually stood up and stared directly down the hallway at the front door. As the sound became so loud, I was now really sweating and basically scared shitless. I tried to move to the front door, but my legs just wouldn't budge. I was paralysed with fear as the sound became so loud I couldn't understand how it wasn't waking the whole house. I managed to move and I walked down the hallway to the front door very slowly. The scratching was deafening. I slowly raised my hand to the lock and turned and pulled, and at that moment the noise just stopped dead and left me looking into an empty front garden. No fleeing animal or person in sight. It really freaked me out because I had no logical explanation for it. I don't think anyone in the house had actually had anything untoward happen to them in the past, but I never even went to the toilet at night ever again without all the lights on. In our second story, this is my friend Sue off Facebook. She's originally from Gillingham, but now in Manchester, and she recounted this story for me, the ghost of Bluebell Hill. On November the 19th, 1965, Susan Brown, 19, and on her hen night, was tragically killed with her 2 friends, Patricia Ferguson and Judith Lingham, on the A229 Medway to Maidstone Road in a terrible road accident. Susan was due to marry RAF man Brian Wetton the following day. There have been many sightings of Susan or her 2 friends, usually in the same way as Sue's uncle, Arthur, saw her. Arthur and his wife were driving up Bluebell Hill many years ago when they saw a young woman hitchhiking. He stopped to give her a lift and she got in the back of the car. He said he wanted to be safe as he had 2 daughters of his own. Halfway up the hill, he looked at his mirror and the girl had gone. Now, many people have seen her this way, but also she sometimes walks out in the front of a car and stares directly into the driver's eyes. When the driver gets out, there is no one there. I would like to thank lovely Lynette from Slimming World for the next story. Lynette says that around 32 years ago, she was driving home from Aylesbury to Chesham, where she was living at the time, after seeing her boyfriend. It was around 10 to 10:30 p.m. It was the days before the bypass, so you had to drive up Wendover High Street, then turn left towards Chesham. Lynette had just turned off the high street when she saw a vision which appeared to be a headless man on a horse. As she got closer, it became clearer. She was worried as it didn't move, and she didn't want to stop. But as she approached it, thankfully it disappeared, and after a glance in the mirror, the apparition had definitely gone. Needless to say, she drove like the clappers out of there. Lynette's words, not mine. She says, after mentioning it to various people, it is well known in the area. I did a bit of research and found this is correct, albeit it is known as the horse and half-rider ghost. The next story is also another friend of mine from Facebook and from Slimming World, Rick. And he goes as follows. This is set in the 1970s when Rick was still living at home in Aylesbury on Easter holidays from Aylesbury College. He says in his own words, my mum was out shopping in Great Missenden and I was home alone with the dog. We had bay windows with French doors at the back of the place and I was sitting in an armchair with my feet up on the coffee table with the back garden to my right. I was reading up on some college work when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Thinking it was the new postie, trying to find the letterbox, this happened regularly and they always ended up in the back garden looking confused. I ignored it and kept on reading, intending to sort things out when the lost visitor appeared. The first odd thing that struck me was the gravel crunching steps continued well beyond any gravel, across grass onto the patio just outside the windows. I looked up from the book and saw out of the corner of my eye a misty grey cowled figure passing the window. Thinking, that's no postie, I looked up fully and saw nothing. The footsteps had ceased too, and at this point the dog went berserk, barking frantically and running from room to room. I sprinted to the kitchen, out of the door and into the garden, meaning to meet the figure head on. Once again I saw nothing. I ran onto the street and saw no one there either. I went back inside, calmed the dog and waited for my mum to get home. Once she arrived, I told her what had happened and she confessed that she had encountered the many things at the house she couldn't explain, like half-seen faces at the window when she was gardening. We never heard the footsteps again, but friends who stayed over in the spare room were convinced they were woken in the early hours and had seen a mysterious girl staring at them. The next story is from my friend Lynn. Early in 1970, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, undecided whether or not to get up and have a cup of tea. I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep, but to no avail. I suddenly felt the sensation of being watched and opened my eyes to see a man standing next to the bed right by my side, about a foot away. He looked solid, in full colour and not wispy or transparent, and there was no drop in temperature in the room. I could describe him easily, and thinking he was a burglar. He was about 5'9", stocky build, with dark hair brushed back, with black square frame glasses. He was wearing beige slacks and a red, white and blue check shirt with a breast pocket. He just stood looking down at me, and when I gasped, he moved back into the darkness. My wardrobe door was slightly ajar, and I could only assume he'd hidden in the wardrobe, even though I thought it would be impossible, as that was full of shoes in the bottom and it was full of clothes. I put the bedside light on and asked my husband to take a look in the wardrobe, but he refused. I got out of bed and I looked in the wardrobe, but of course there was no one in there. The bedroom door was closed and I checked all through the flat, but all doors and windows were closed and locked. That was probably my first encounter with actually seeing a ghost. Now, my final story tonight is one from my daughter, who, when you hear this, will realise is a very, very strange girl. Now, in her own words, now this is the only truly strange thing that has ever happened to me that I can't really explain. And I'd be lying if I didn't say it scared the living crap out of me. I live in a quaint and quiet, beautiful village in the Buckinghamshire countryside where everyone knows everyone. About 5 years ago, I was asked by my neighbours if I could come over and sit in their house where their 2-year-old daughter was asleep for a couple of hours as they needed to pop out. Now, I must explain at this point that I am an extremely socially anxious person, and also, I'm very sorry to say, not a kid person. I don't dislike children, I just don't really like them around me. Anyway, as these neighbours are lovely people, I reluctantly agreed. It's a 30-second walk to their house, literally directly opposite mine. All I had to do was sit on the sofa in their living room watching TV for 2 hours. Easy, right? Wrong. They met me at the door and informed me they had left me tea and snacks. Of course, this caused me to be anxious. And yes, you guessed it, I get anxious about snacks at other people's houses. Then I get anxious about not eating them and they think that I'm rude. Anyway, I digress. They leave and I start watching a rerun of Friends. After about an hour, I leave the sanctuary of the living room to wet a tea bag and throw it in the bin and swish a mug so it looks like I actually had a cup of tea. Yes, I know, weird, right? As I'm swishing out the mug, I notice that there is a cackling sound, and I notice a baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Oh no, I thought, the child has risen. I'm going to have to adult. But no, it was far, far worse than that. As out of the monitor came the voice of an old lady which said, "Who's that lady sitting downstairs?" I froze. I couldn't move. I was literally paralysed with fear. As soon as the shock was over, I was back in the living room with the door securely shut. I know what you're about to say. Did you check on the kid? To my eternal shame, I didn't. But come on, I just heard a freaking crispy old crone voice coming from her room. It felt like an eternity for the neighbours to return home. When they did, it was a quick bye and I power walked home. I was too terrified to look over at their house for months after, in case I saw an old crone at the window. They never knew what had happened that night, and they have moved now, but I will never forget that night. Anyway, everybody, I hope you sleep well. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Under the Covers with Lyndon. It's a bit of fun. If anybody wants to send their stories in, please do, and periodically I will release another one. I hope you've enjoyed it, and say 2 weeks time back with Murder at Bedtime. Got a very good Aylesbury case that I think you'll enjoy, and as I say, good night everybody, sleep well.